Thanks for this stimulating talk about how to communicate. So now questions are welcome from everybody, and I invite you all, and also particularly the students here, there are students from our doctorate and our faculty, to ask questions also about the economic background of the talk. So we have heard exit from the Eurozone, deficit spending as a tool to reach full employment, etc. On all these subjects you may have questions, doubt, criticism, or simply request further explanations, so please do it. La presentazione, prego. Poi c'è lei, poi altre... Grazie.
And I'm always criticising economists and politicians. And I'd go one step further, that if a doctor, a medical doctor, demonstrated the same incompetence that my profession demonstrates, then they'd be jailed. So I agree with you. But it's the way you criticise that's important. And that's what my message was today. That the public don't give a damn about what academic economists are arguing among themselves. They don't care less. They don't understand it. They think it's just idiots who've got too much time on their hands and should get a real job. The way to convince the public, the mass, is the way social change occurs, not convincing my colleagues in the academy. They're gone for all. They're never going to change. Because for them to admit they're wrong is to admit their whole career was a waste of time. They're never going to do that. But what we progressive economists can do is to be smarter than that, and to work out language and work out the way people understand things, these metaphorical embodiments, and start talking to the people in a way that they can understand and realise after we've done those discussions that their politicians are lying to them, that there are alternatives, there are different causal structures, and there are different generating structures. So I think I've spent my whole life wasting my time fighting with my colleagues. I think it's time that we all forgot that. That's a waste of time. And argue and work out clever ways to articulate MMT principles in ways that people understand and reinforce their sense of purpose and destination. These are research centres within university system. People in my centre, this centre here, Centre for Employment and Equity, it's located in Australia and in Maastricht in the Netherlands. And we employ people and we do research, and that's academic work. And the Centre for Employment and Price Stability is centred at UMKC in Kansas City, and it's an academic research centre. Now these have a purpose, and we've been developing an evidence base and a theoretical base, but they're not political organisations. They're not open to membership. I'm not aiming to be a politician at all. So what I've been talking about today really implies that the next step is for political organisations to form, which have the direct purpose of advancing the political agenda in the mainstream political processes, that take members of grassroots movements. These centres are research centres in universities. That's not their purpose. Our purpose is to theorise and do research, not to be politicians.
Però in maniera semplice da veicolare alla commessa
Imagine the economy has two people. You can be the private sector, the non-government sector.
Yeah.
I'm the government.
Yeah.
Okay? I announce that to be in my country, you have to pay $100 in tax. Good? Thank you. Where is it?
Thank you. Easy.
No, where is it? No, that's not. I want $100. Before you can pay that $100, what do I have to do? I have to spend it. You don't get it. It's my money. I'm the issuer. So, okay, I spend $100 and I tax you $100. My currency, you've got it now. I take it back. How much have you got left? Can you save? You've got a balanced budget? Have I? Now, imagine I say, okay, I want you to be able to save. So $120 and I tax you 20. Oh, sorry, 100. Give me back the 100, thank you. What have you got left? 20. You've saved 20. You've got a surplus of 20? Yes? The amount you've had to pay out is less than the amount you've got in, your income. I've hired you to do things with this 120. You're advancing public purpose. I've given you 120 and only taken 100 back. Have I got a surplus or a deficit? Deficit of 20? My deficit of 20 is exactly equal to your surplus of 20. You've only been able to save in my currency if I've been running a deficit. Now say I become neoliberal oriented and I decide to now tax you 120 and only pay you 100. So now where are you going to get the extra 20 from? Well, you're going to have to run down your savings that you've got in the last period of 20. So I'm going to run a surplus of 20. You're going to run down your financial wealth, which you had built up last period with 20, and now you've got no wealth left. The fundamental principles are that the non-government surplus is exactly equal to the government deficit. And a government surplus exactly destroys that much wealth each period in the non-government sector. Now, if you want to get more complicated and bring in the foreign sector, it only alters the distribution between domestic residents and the rest of the world. It doesn't alter the accounting principle. The international law has established precedents about what defines national sovereignty or not. And a nation always has the right to declare the currency in which it will operate. And no international legal challenge would overthrow that. None. That's been well established in national courts and in international courts. Lexus monetae is the principle. That's the principle. So Italy could, tonight, the Italian government, if it had sense, maybe not tonight, but it could, announce that as from tomorrow, the lira is the new lira, is the only legal currency in the borders that we control. And political alliances would be meaningless. Unless you thought that NATO would invade the House seat of government and re-establish the euro. A sovereign government, by definition and by international law, can always establish its own currency. The principle of lex monetae, which is the right of a sovereign government to declare the currency it will operate in, is very well understood. And when the Troika, the ECB, the EU, the European Commission and the International Monetary Fund bailed out Greece, they reconstructed the debt under English law, not Greek law. Because they knew that if they can reconstruct it under Greek law, lex monetae, the legal principle applied. Whereas if they reconstructed it under British law, the British government was the defining jurisdiction for legal challenges, not the Greek jurisdiction, the Greek legal system. So even the Troika recognises the international power of the right of a country to determine its currency and the liabilities in which it will accept and allow to be legally structured. In practice, in December 2001, people were getting shot in the streets in Argentina because their currency was collapsing. It was tied to the US dollar. All their debts, external debts, the government debt and the private sector debts were denominated in US dollars. In January 2002, the government of Argentina announced immediately that it was defaulting on all its external currency debts. It broke the link with the peseta and the US dollar and only accepted the peso, only accepted the peso as a legally denominated currency. In practice, it did it. And it exploited lex monetae. And they forced the external creditors to renegotiate agreements in pesos. The mainstream parties, political parties in every country that I know of, forget them. The so-called left is more right than the right used to be. In Australia, the Labor Party, which was formed as the political arm of the trade union movement, is more right-wing than the Conservative Party used to be 25 years ago. And they differentiate themselves by social policy, so attitude to, say, gays and same-sex marriage and public education a bit, but on the core issues of economics, identical. It makes the so-called democratic choice a farce. And I agree that that's a huge challenge. And so that any progressive political movement has to come from outside that framework. And back home, I'm always arguing that the progressives should who vote Labor, the so-called left, because they've got no other choice, should actually try to vote for the opposition to completely wipe out the Labor Party. So that, see this as a 3 or 4 election cycle phase of completely wiping out the so-called Progressive Party and starting again. Now, I also understand, because Fox News is run by an Australian who gave up his citizenship to become an American so he could build an empire in America. So we know all about Murdoch. And I agree that they dominate the media, and the framing that they put out and the language they use is a very powerful force. But where the hope lies is that there's now an uncontrollable force, and that's social media and the internet. And that's giving the elites a real headache, because everybody can become a publisher and messages can just tweet around like that. And also the young, the youth, the future of the world relate in a different way to the way Fox and those media organisations haven't caught up with that yet. And I don't think young people watch Fox News, and I don't think they read those stupid tabloid newspapers that they pump out in every country. I think the young people read Facebook, watch YouTube, and whatever the latest things are. I've forgotten them all. Can't keep up with them. So I think that the progressive left have to learn a new language, have to learn a framing structure, and have to exploit grassroots networks that are outside the mainstream political process. I agree with you. That's a huge challenge. The government has to spend its currency to exist. It doesn't come from anywhere else. The monetary operations that it may use to accompany that spending, if you go back to the work of Ava Lerner in the 1940s, he teaches us that whether you raise taxes, whether you sell bonds, or whether you sell bonds to the central bank, depends upon what you want to achieve. But they're never, those 3 options are never anything to do with providing funds for the government to spend. That's the first point. So, why would you increase taxes, for example? Well, you might want the private sector to have less money, less purchasing power. Why? Because you're close to full capacity and you want to build more public space and less private space. And so you have to take away spending power from the private sector to create the real resource space for the government spending to build public infrastructure, for example. So then you tax. Or you might simply want the public to stop smoking. So you'll tax cigarettes. When you sell bonds, depends upon whether you want the wealth portfolio of the private sector to be more in government bonds and less in some other form of financial asset. So it all depends, and it could be a very complex decision. But none of those monetary operations have anything to do with providing the funds for governments to spend. When Argentina broke the dollar peg in 2002 and reasserted its full currency sovereignty, the exchange rate fell fairly immediately. There was quite a substantial depreciation. As there was in 2010 in Iceland, when they privatised, nationalised their banking system and defaulted on all of the external bank debts. But by 2005, the Argentinian central bank was conducting monetary operations to try to stop its exchange rate appreciating too much. And similar in Iceland, if you look at the exchange rate in Iceland now, it's appreciated strongly after initially falling. Why? Because if government deficits are to build statues of famous political leaders, then they serve no public purpose, and financial markets will punish the government for doing that. But if the fiscal deficits are expanding opportunities in the private sector, expanding employment, expanding sales, then everybody wants to be part of that economy. And I remember in, I think it was 2004, a press conference with the Minister of Finance in Argentina. And he was asked the question, and what happened initially was when they defaulted on all the debt, the IMF and the World Bank and the big investment banks in the north said, you'll never get another cent of foreign direct investment. We'll boycott you forever. And within about 2 quarters, 6 months, foreign direct investment was starting to flow back in because the intervention, the Argentine government cut the link with the US dollar, reasserted sovereignty, floated the exchange rate, brought in a job guarantee program, so they offered a certain number of hours to any household that wanted a job. They employed 670,000 workers within 6 months on all sorts of community-oriented projects, and that kick-started their economy again. And within 2 or 3 years, there was foreign direct investment pouring in to that economy, and the exchange rate was starting to move up again. And the Minister for Finance was asked by the media, you've just defaulted on all this debt, you told the IMF to piss off. How the hell do you explain the world investment banks pouring money back into your economy? And he said, there is no ideology when it comes to the investment banks. There is only greed. And they'll chase a return wherever they think they can get it, whether the government's asserting currency sovereignty or not. And so you shouldn't be scared. This is a neoliberal scare campaign that your currency will collapse. It's like I hear all the time when I say that Italy should exit the euro. Oh, the currency will collapse. Well, if you think about it, in the short run it won't collapse very much, if not at all, because where is the foreign markets going to get the lira from to sell? It won't be very liquid. Currency markets in lira wouldn't be very liquid in the first year, because there wouldn't have been that much of it around relative to the euro. So how the hell is it going to collapse? Probably I'm the first of the original MMT economists who comes from a small open economy. And when you're talking to the Americans,
They don't understand the point.
haven't got a clue. They're a large closed economy relatively. I come from an economy where in 1986 the exchange rate swing cancelled within 1 quarter 10% of nominal GDP. Huge. But within about 3 quarters it had reversed again. In early 2000, the Americans used to come down to visit me and they'd call us half-price country. because the Australian dollar was, the US dollar was 50 cents to one Australian dollar. What is it now? Close to parity. 1 to 1. It's not quite, but it has been above parity. And so I live in a country where the exchange rate swings quite substantially, but our living, we're the second wealthiest country per capita in the world. We have extremely high living standards. And what happens when the exchange rate depreciates? Well, trips to Italy become more expensive. BMW cars become more expensive. And what happens when it's higher as it is now? Well, all food in the shops here looks very cheap to me. That's all that happens. And I think in general, like Australia's run a large current account deficit for 45 years. Yet at the same time our living standards have grown and grown and grown, and we're now second below Switzerland on most of the measures. So I grow up in a country and I live in a country and I've studied a country where we've had massive balance of payment swings, but they adjust. They're finite, both directions, and they're not particularly influenced by the state of the fiscal balance. Not particularly influenced at all. And the second point I'd make is that I like it. iPhone 6 Plus. I like it. And I've got a French car. And I love campagnolo on my push bikes, my cycles. And this is probably, I think this is Italian wool. Italian fabric. And this is probably Finnish wool or something from Finland. So the point I'm making is that imports are good things for us. Exports are a cost to us because we're giving up real resources. And so if a country can persuade the rest of the world to send more stuff that we like on boats in real terms than they're prepared to accept from us in real terms, that's good. And if they're stupid enough to keep sending us all this stuff and only accept in return paper, financial claims, well and good. The point I'm making is that current account deficits are not a problem. Current account deficits increase the real standard of living of a country. And the current account surpluses deprive citizens in the surplus countries of a real standard of living. So Germany is busily getting real resources and working hard and sacrificing to send us cars. Fine. I'm happy. So I think this idea that a balance of payments constraint is something you've got to really worry about. I live in a country where the exchange rate goes all over the place, and yet we suffer around the margins when it's down and we gain when it's up. But in general, our standard of living is very high, and partly that is because of the public investment in schooling, university system. We have a national health system and good transport systems and the rest of it. So I don't share your concern. I know that mainstream Keynesians are very worried about balance of payments constraints, but that literature emerged during fixed exchange rate system. We don't have that anymore. Our adjustment is the exchange rate, up and down. And when it goes down, our standard of living falls a bit. And when it goes up, our standard of living rises. But moreover, typically, when the exchange rate depreciates, it's the higher income groups that suffer. Why? Because they're the ones that go to the Swiss Alps for skiing holidays. And they're the ones that buy the luxury cars from Germany. So I'm not so worried about that. And where a country has to import food, then a balance of payments constraint is important. So for us, Australia, we're fine. We're rich. But for a poor African nation, a balance of payments problem can mean it can't get foreign exchange to buy food. That's an issue. But that's a special case. And that's, to me, the legitimate role of an organisation like the IMF. That we need a world organisation that can help stabilise currencies for countries that are going to be in, food shortages. That's the qualification. And imagine, and the other point I'd make is European Commission and all of its lackey economists are always saying, well, if Greece leaves, for example, or Italy, then the exchange rate will go through the floor and they'll have terrible inflation, so on and so forth. Well, if the exchange rate would drop in the new drachma, for example, who do you think would be heading south on planes as quickly as possible to have very cheap holidays in the beautiful Greek islands? Germans. And if you go to my blog and look up about, there's a test you can do for yourself called the Political Compass. politicalcompass.org. And it's it has a four-quadrant assessment, your economic, whether you're left or right, and your social values, left or right, free or not free. And modern monetary theory principles can be understood by anybody. And any set of social values and political aspirations can be overlaid on them and used accordingly. And what I often say is that once the population understood MMT principles, then the right-wingers, the neoliberals, could no longer say that we have to have 20% unemployment in Greece because we can't afford governments to create full employment. They wouldn't be allowed to say that anymore because the population would say, no, that's wrong. You want 20% unemployment because you want to suppress wages growth and push profits to the capitalists. So there's an advantage of developing MMT understandings. The argument becomes much more transparent as to what your true motivations are. But there is no politics in MMT. You have to, it's a toolkit, a framework for understanding and explaining things. You have to bring your own value systems to it. And just because the right-wingers in Italy and elsewhere are picking up on it more quickly, maybe they're smarter. Maybe the progressives are too dumb to know they're onto a good thing. But I think that just because the League and Order looking into this is not a reason for the left to develop it and use it in a more smart, appealing way. We do have a concept of ongoing growth in nature. Plants grow, they shed their seeds, and those seeds regenerate into new plants. And as long as we maintain a sustainable ecology, then we can have regeneration. Now, if you've got growing population, you have to have economic growth if you want full employment. So if you value full employment, then you've got to grow the scale of the jobs and the economy if your population's grown. Progressives can't escape that. The sort of tree-hugging left, as we call them in Australia, the sort of narrow-minded greenies, they think that you can have no growth. But they're not going to give up their jobs. So the challenge for progressive economists is to make that growth regenerative. And you saw my vision number 2, where the people are living within the planet. You can still have economic growth without violating the natural limits of the planet's resources. And my personal belief is that more public activity will be better for that than leaving the private market to determine the allocation of resources. Because public activity can allocate resources with a broader goal in mind, a social return, not a private return. And that part of that social return can be your natural accounting, your natural regeneration. You can't escape the idea that you need growth if you've got expanding population, unless you want a lot of people to be left behind without jobs. About Argentina and about countries that have resource constraints. But what I would say is that a nation ultimately, its standard of living will ultimately be determined by what resources it's got available to it. And if it can't persuade the rest of the world to let it run current account deficits forever, then it's going to have a lower real standard of living than if it can. So Australia's lucky we can persuade the rest of the world to send us all these things. And the day that it stops sending us iPhones at prices we can pay, then we'll have a lower standard of living. So I accept the fact that some countries have real problems being able to generate sufficient export revenue to bring in the essential capital machinery and food and medical supplies and all the rest of it. That becomes a constraint. And what that means is their standard of living is limited by their resource base that is available to them and the willingness of the rest of the world to send them things. So don't ever get the impression that MMT thinking, the principles, say that there's nirvana out there for everybody and the exchange rate doesn't matter. Ultimately, a country's welfare and well-being is limited, and what it can do is limited by its resource base. But a government can always maximise the utilisation of its resource base. Now that for its currency sovereignty, that might mean a lower standard of living than another country. The short answer is no. But a slightly longer answer, which is still going to be short, is that you have to understand what people do. And there is no international organisation, and there never will be from us. I'm an academic researcher. And my role is not as an advocate. I'm a teacher, an educator, and a researcher. And politics is in terms of my philosophy, is a localised thing. The last thing you want is some character like me from Australia telling you how to do things in your own country. That's what the IMF does. They go into countries and bully them around and tell them what to do. All I do is I've spent my life working out principles to educate people about the way a monetary economy works. And these issues, the political issues, are local issues. And it's not for me to lecture Italians on what policies they want to pursue. And all I can say is, if you ring me up or send me an email and you say, what's likely to happen if we leave the euro, I'll send you a book and you'll be able to read, and that'll be derived from my principles. But it's not our role as educators to form an international group that becomes the sort of vision for the world. Visions for the world are bottom-up things, grassroots, people-oriented. It's not a church. The MMT isn't a church or a religion. There's no cult.